You may have heard about how to build a mage at low level. Today, the great Gandalf will show you what a mage at 120 is capable of, and how to smash hoes like nobody knows.
That is right, YouTube. Cowboy here, and it is finally time to bring you the mage build, and this is Gandalf. So, as you can probably imagine, pretty obvious where I got the inspiration for this character from, and in true Gandalf fashion, we are rocking the staff in the left hand and the sword in the right hand. So, to take a look at the stats, as you can see, we are at level 120. Main points of importance here are getting intelligence to 60, which will give us the best damage returns for our spells. Our attunement to 30, giving us 5 slots as well as plenty of FP to cast. Strength to 16 to meet the strength requirement on the Moonlight Greatsword. And then following that, I would suggest splitting your points up between Vigor and Endurance in a way that you're most comfortable with. Vitality, Faith, and Luck we can all leave at base, and Dexterity was a little bit lower than 12, but I ended up picking up an S-Stock to help level this quite early because an S-Stock with Crystal Magic Rapier is devastating, while your spells early on are not. So Dexterity we left at 12. Moving into the actual gear we're using, we have a Court Sorcerer Staff plus 10 in our offhand, as well as a Blessed Caestus. In the main hand, we are running a Scholar's Candlestick, Crystal Longsword plus 10, and Moonlight Greatsword plus 5. As per the particular fashion of this build, we have a Sage's Big Hat, Court Sorcerer Robe, Sorcerer Gloves, and then Jailer Trousers, which I think comes together quite well. Now, one thing I want to point out is a lot of people are probably going to say, Cowboy, why aren't you running the Crown of Dusk? Because it boosts magical damage. And quite simply, it's because the Crown of Dusk looks fucking retarded. I would much rather have a giant hat on than some stupid, weird, fluffy ear thing. So, as for our rings, we are running the Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring, the Young Dragon Ring, the Sage Ring, and the Chloranthy Ring. If you're not a fan of Chloranthy, feel free to toss on a Ring of Favor instead, or whatever else you'd like. I would not suggest doing the Magic Clutch, however, as the damage boost from it is roughly identical to that of the Young Dragon Ring, but on top of that, you of course take a hit to your defense while using it. As for a particular spell loadout, we are running Homing Crystal Soul Mass, which will be our main initiator in PvP, Crystal Soul Spear, which will be our primary nuke in PvP, Soul Greatsword for AoE clearing, Farron Flash Sword for quick attacks as well as finishing off mobs, and then Great Heavy Soul Arrow as our main PvE spell. Now, taking a look at Crystal Soul Spear versus Great Heavy Soul Arrow, just to show the damage difference here, as you can see, pretty large FP cast on that. And despite that, only 875 damage, whereas Great Heavy Soul Arrow, we're getting 670. So, not that much of a damage difference between Great Heavy Soul Arrow and Crystal Soul Spear. However, Crystal Soul Spear costs considerably more to cast, which is important to note. Going into the spells real fast, as you can see, this is going to take up 46 FP, whereas Great Heavy Soul Arrow is only going to cost 14. So we can basically get 3 of those in for the cost of 1 Crystal Soul Spear. With that being said, in PvP, I would still suggest Crystal Soul Spear, just because you want to get as much damage in as possible, and on top of that, it does have pierce potential, allowing you to hit multiple enemies. So, with that being said, let's head on through, show you what it's capable of. Obviously, as I mentioned, we have Soul Greatsword, which is going to be our main AoE clear. On top of that, the Crystal Longsword, a great option for finishing off enemies. Now, it is important to note that, being a mage, of course, you are quite squishy. If I was to let this thing hit me, you'll see it do quite a bit of damage. So, if at all possible, I do not want to let it hit me, and will be much better off nuking it from range, which thankfully isn't that hard, given the type of damage we can do. As you can see, took that down with ease without getting hit. Now, as for some of our other spells, Homing Crystal Soul Mass, Crystal Soul Spear, I would suggest shying away from those while you're clearing PvE content, simply due to the FP cost of them. Soul Greatsword, still a very good spell for clearing out groups of enemies. On top of that, Farron Flash Sword, a fairly powerful spell for faster enemies, such as dogs, for example. So, take the dog and you can see we are able to get pretty good damage. Damage that's actually relative to that of our longsword in, but a little bit faster. Just looking at the swings here, you can see with the longsword we're getting fairly quick swings in, as expected, but the Fair and Flash Sword actually just slightly quicker while having damage that is comparable, so it's going to be one of our main finishers in PvP, especially because of the fact that it is quite hard to parry, because you need to have spell parry. So some other things to point out while we're going through as the mage. As many of you may know, you can hit left trigger and boost the damage of your spells with the spell art, such as this. That being said, I would suggest mainly saving it for clearing up to a boss. As you can see, we're able to do 900 damage while buffed, whereas if we aren't buffed, we're hitting these guys for 804. So it is a fairly significant damage increase, but because that enchantment doesn't last very long, I would suggest conserving your FP and saving that for bosses. So as you can see, a perfect example of just how much damage we can take when caught out as a mage, which is why you do want to be cautious, because otherwise you end up going down relatively fast. So some other things to touch on while we're going through. As for our actual sorceries, while you're going through and focused on just casting, you are best off having the Scholar's Candlestick equipped. Now the reason for this is the Scholar's Candlestick actually boosts your damage by quite a bit. And just to demonstrate this better, as you can see against this enemy right now, we had 682. With the Scholar's Candlestick equipped, however, 845. So a fairly large increase to our damage potential there. And especially when you're focused on just using sorceries, that's really going to help you out and it's going to shine. And that applies for both PvE and PvP, of course. Another thing that's interesting is, especially in PvP, always make sure you have your candlestick equipped when you are buffing up your Homing Crystal Soul Mass, as after that you can switch up to whatever weapon you want and put this candlestick away, but the Homing Crystal Soul Mass will still receive that damage increase from it. Just to show some other damage comparisons here while we make our way back after our unfortunate death. As you can see, we're getting hits at 308 on the longsword. Fair and Flash Sword just barely below that damage. But same thing, if we do the Fair and Flash Sword while having the Scholar's Candlestick equipped, you can see we are now hitting harder than our Crystal Longsword. So many of you may be wondering why we went for Crystal Longsword versus Crystal Magic Weapon. The main reason for that is because you're likely going to be swapping between the Scholar's Candlestick and your Longsword. I felt it better not to rely on a buff, because that way if you have to swap, you can safely swap without worrying about having to reapply the buff. And on top of that, having it as Crystal will still receive the scaling benefit from all of that intelligence that we have, making it ideal. At this point, we're going to continue clearing on out, make our way to the boss. Felt Champion Gundr would be a fairly good boss to showcase what this is capable of against, given the just extreme physicality of that boss and how deadly he can be. Felt it would be a rather interesting matchup, placing him against the mage. Oh, one other thing I should mention before we get too far. Your Scholar's Candlestick, obviously we don't have the weapon requirements for it. Rest assured, you don't need those weapon requirements to be able to get the sorcery damage boost from it. Additionally, even if you do meet the weapon requirements and level it all the way up to +10, the damage on it is still extremely terrible, so just don't bother. It's simply not worth it. So, either way, let's buff on up. We'll buff this up just for the start here, and let's go on in and see what kind of damage we can do to the boss. As you can see, already massive chunks, and that's really where sorcery still shines in Dark Souls. You know, I will say that the tracking has taken quite a hit in comparison to how it was in Dark Souls 2. We're not able to set up combos in PvP to instantly annihilate enemies as much as we were able to previously. But despite that, we still have absurd damage, and especially in PvE, as you can see, maintaining our range, we're able to take down Gundr with ease, just, you know, doing massive chunks of damage to him. So obviously, he's He's getting a little bit up on us now. Second phase of Gundar, obviously much more aggressive. We are topping off our health due to how squishy we are. Despite that, one more attack should be all I need here. And no, we traded. Unbelievable. So despite us trading killing blows there, as you can see, the damage is still pretty ridiculous. That being said, I do feel that mages aren't quite as powerful as they were in comparison to previous iterations of the franchise. The damage is still there, but the main drawback of mages is without a Sage's Ring, for example, or leveling your dex up to 50, you have fairly ridiculous cast speed, borderline it being almost unusable. So just to show you here, without it, you know, that's a absurdly long cast to get that kind of damage off, and especially in PvP, you simply can't do that. You know, it's very easy to get killed trying to get off a slow cast like that, making it basically necessary for you to have on the Sage's Ring, otherwise leveling your dex on up. Whereas in previous installments of the game, well, Dark Souls 1, you know, you got cast speed from dex, but even then, the casts weren't exactly as slow as you see them now. So some other important points to make with Sorcery. One of our main combos is going to involve Homing Crystal Soul Mask and Crystal Soul Spear, and you'll see that a lot in PvP, but the most common way to set that up is to basically back hop towards the enemy so that your Crystal Soul Mask doesn't fire off prematurely, and then start, well, messed it up there, but start casting your Crystal Soul Spear, and then about halfway through the cast, you'll spin and lock on. So trying to do it here, but this mob is not behaving with us. I do want to demonstrate this for you guys before we go into the PvP montage, as it is the main kill combo. On top of that, some other popular tactics are using branches or the spell to make you invisible, just to allow you to get in some extra damage, because you can't really just run up and approach enemies with Sorcery this time around. You're much better off taking a hidden approach, if you will. So here we go. We're going to... We already have Homing Crystal up, Soul Spear, spin, and that's the combo right there. So the main idea here is that while the enemy is staggered from the Homing Crystal Soul Mass, that's when you're supposed to connect with the Crystal Soul Spear, allowing you to basically instant kill the enemy. And it is quite an effective tactic, but at the end of the day, running into more experienced PvPers, they simply won't allow that to happen. So do keep in mind that if you're planning to execute that combo, you will have to have a fair amount of finesse in doing it. Pull you on over. Nope. Stop it. And that's really all there is to it. I mean, I know a lot of people have been curious about whether or not mages are viable. You know, it is fairly difficult to level a mage this time around compared to previous iterations, but it is still possible. You know, we do have the AoE potential to clear out groups of enemies quite fast, as you're seeing. You know, just decimated those groups of dogs. But, you know, we are squishy, and we definitely don't have the tracking we used to. But either way, guys, sit back, enjoy some PvP.
And watch as we explode noobs who aren't expecting it.